Welcome back to our third video on how to deal with stress while facing COVID-19. During this video, we're going to take a look at what we talked about in the last one, do a quick review, then we're going to go and talk about paradigms, perspectives, and about attitude, negative and positive. Lastly, we'll talk about how to parent during COVID-19 and some of the ways to deal with stress in the home. So last week we talked about focusing on what's in your control, and we looked at the model where we have the circle of influence and the circle of control, as well as the circle of what's our concern. And if you remember, the big takeaway with that is when we're feeling a lot of stress, we're feeling frustration, is to know to sit down and look at those circles and identify where are you putting your focus. If it's with the circle of concern, your stress is going to be higher, and we want to move it back to where our circle of control is. So that was one thing we talked about. We also talked about a lot of different stress management techniques between physical activity, between mindfulness, between breathing, how we eat, things we can be doing around the home for ourselves to make sure that we're trying to reduce that stress. Today, we're going to start out by talking about paradigms. So you might be asking, what is a paradigm? So a paradigm is a way of how we see the world, the way that we see that it should be operating, or the way we think things should be, how they have to be. And so it confines us in the way that we think. It makes it so it's difficult to see all the opportunities, all the different solutions out there. However, it helps us, and why we have them is because it helps us identify ways that work well and we can continue to do them. But, like I said, it limits us, limits our view to knowing things that might work differently, or being able to see things through a different perspective or a different way of living life. So what we're looking for when we're dealing with stress is recognizing that when things bump up against our paradigm, it can be very stressful. This might be happening right now because maybe you're having to work virtually, or your kids are doing school from home, or you're having to find out different ways to make income, to pay the bills, to live life differently than you've lived it before. So it starts breaking your paradigms. For example, a lot of people I work with, it's a struggle to all of a sudden move to a virtual world or work with people virtually when they were so used to working with people face to face. And so it starts changing their paradigm on what can be and what works well. So what happens when we have our paradigms, if we're not allowing to have those paradigms challenged and have paradigm shifts, we become kind of stuck in them. We get in our ruts and we start having really rigid thinking. Now, the more rigid our thinking is and the more rigidity we have, it's actually going to create stress in our life anytime something challenges us. Whether we recognize it or not, stress is going to go up a little bit because we don't have resiliency, we don't have flexibility. As we allow paradigm shifts to happen, even though they can be very jarring for us, if we allow them and explore them and be curious about all the different opportunities in the world, all the different ways that people can see life and see how it can be, if we're open to that and we allow the rigidity to go away and we try to increase our resiliency and flexibility, more likely when things come our way that are difficult and tough in our life, more likely our stress is going to be okay during those moments. Again, the more rigid we are, stress is higher during change. The more resilient and flexible we are, our stress is going to be lower during these kinds of moments. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so that when we feel a frustration or an anger or stress, when life is changing or people propose change, that's probably because they're butting up against your paradigm. They're butting up against the way you see life is supposed to operate. And when you feel that happen, what you're wanting to do is pause, be curious about what's going on, be curious about the proposal, be curious about the ideas. Listen to them, consider them. Be open to seeing what that might look like, right? Challenge yourself on your own way of thinking. This helps produce resiliency. it helps produce that flexibility I'm talking about. It allows you to be a little bit more adaptable when difficult and trying times come. So again, a paradigm is the way we see how life is, or it's supposed to be. We want to be challenging those paradigms and being curious when our paradigms are challenged and being open to new ideas, new ways of doing things. Doesn't mean we have to do all of them. It's just being open and curious and learning and not trying to be so focused with our blinders that we can't see other opportunities that might work significantly better than what we're doing now. In one of our classes, a mom brought up a great example of this when we asked, how might you apply this information about paradigms and challenging your paradigms in your home? She said, Jason, would it be kind of like a situation where I had with my oldest child, where she has to do a different type of homework than my younger ones. My younger ones have to read and read out loud, and she has to do something where she feels if she has music on, she can do better at her homework. And I was fighting with her on this at first, and it didn't go so well. And finally I was like, you know what, if that's good for you, how about you go do it in your room so you have a space to do that, and the other kids will do their homework at the table. And it worked. She said it was beneficial. And I said, exactly, that is a paradigm shift. The mom's paradigm, the way that she saw things, is that this child had to do homework without music, had to do it in a certain location, right? That was the way she saw that life had to be. And as soon as she stopped that and saw that there's other ways to get the same outcome, then it's okay. So she allowed the space for her child to be able to go and experience that. So she was shifting her perspective, her way of seeing life, her paradigm on how homework has to be done, and allowed the space for the child to have some autonomy, to have choice, to have a voice in how they want to run their life. So that was an excellent example of a paradigm, challenging her paradigm, and shifting the way that she's doing things. Again, this can help you reduce stress if you can learn to challenge them and be open and curious when things come your way. So our next topic is attitude. And we're going to be taking a look at what negative and positive attitude is and what the differences is and how they can impact you. So what do you think might be the benefits of a positive attitude? Both physically, mentally, with our stress. What does a positive attitude bring to the table on why we would even talk about it in this video? So some of the things you might know is positive attitudes. They help with increased lifespan. They help with lower rates of depression, lower levels of distress, greater resistance to the common cold, better psychological and physical well-being, better cardiovascular health and reduced risk of death from cardiovascular disease, and better coping skills during hardships and times of stress. So if you notice that last one, first off, there's lots of health benefits and ways that positive attitudes impact us. If we can have that positive attitude, more than likely when we have stressful situations come along, we're able to see the positive in the situation, right? It's allowing a balance. Now, this isn't talking about being naive and being totally ignorant of the things that are difficult in life. This is talking about being able to look at, well, what is going on right now that is positive, or what is the solutions here, and how do we find a solution instead of being caught up in what isn't and what could be that isn't happening, or where people are failing and where all the problems are. And if we get fixated on those things, we start into our negative thinking. And again, if we get fixated on those things, where are we at in our circle of influence and circle of concern? We're in the circle of concern. Again, circle of concern might create negative thinking. Negative thinking equates to stress. Positive thinking reduces stress, allows us to see the potential in things, allows us to see the solutions, allows us to see what the opportunities are, where we might be able to go with something. We're not being naive, we're looking at the positive and what's in front of us. And it's there, it's just deciding on if you want to see it and whether you want to identify it and what you want to do with it. Other negative thinking might be filtering. And filtering is where you're kind of magnifying the negative aspects to a situation instead of being able to see the whole picture and being able to see all aspects of it. You take and you negate the positive things and you just filter all the bad, and that's all you'll look at. That's filtering. Another negative thinking is personalizing. When something bad occurs, you automatically blame yourself. You're always looking at you and always blaming you and taking everything personal. The Mayans had a great way to be able to deal with this. And they had a rule or a way of life that they always encouraged not to take things personal. And over time, I've helped teach that many times. In fact, I've altered it a bit where I often encourage people not to take things personal, but also don't speak things personal. So don't make it personal about the person, right? A lot of times situations, it's not really about the person. It's about a behavior that happened or an incident that happened within a situation. And if we can talk about a behavior or the system or situation that created whatever it is we're talking about, more likely we're going to have a good conversation about something that can change and be modified, and it doesn't have to be taken personal. At the same time, when somebody says something to you and you feel very taken back and it goes right to your core and you take it personal, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be about you. This is about someone else's perspective. It's about the way they see life, and it doesn't have to be about you. For example, if someone says, hey, the way that you keep talking is annoying everybody. What they're really saying is, I'm getting annoyed. They're having annoyance. They have low tolerance for whatever is happening. That's a perspective on their end. It's not something you have to take personal. That is about them. Now, of course, there is that caveat that there might be things we are doing we need to change. But that again is about a behavior. And if it's about a behavior we're doing, we can learn, we can grow, we can modify and change. So we can take it in and say, is that something I want to modify? Is that something I want to do differently? Is it something I'm noticing that's causing impacts in lots of relationships or lots of situations I'm in? And if so, change. Find a way to see what you can do differently. And sometimes that might mean you need to talk with somebody. You might need a counselor to kind of help with that change, but you might want to just change. But don't take it personal. We all do behaviors that can be annoying to someone or frustrating. That's because we're all human. The next negative thinking is catastrophizing. It's when we always think the worst is going to happen, right? So my kids aren't home 5 minutes beyond what they're normally home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're dead, right? I'm catastrophizing the situation. Instead of going, actually, you know what? This happens probably 2 or 3 times a month. And it's normally because a friend talked to them on the way home or a teacher talked to them. And we look at it rationally. We look at what the most likely outcome or likely situation is. Catastrophizing can make it so you feel like you need to be on edge all the time. It starts increasing a lot of anxiety and stress that we don't need to have there. So catastrophizing thinking actually is a negative thinking that will increase that stress, increase the anxiety. The last one is polarizing. Now, polarizing thinking is when we think everything has to be good or bad. There is no middle ground. When reality, there's almost always middle ground. And good and bad, that's just a perspective. It's a paradigm that you believe in. Good and bad, it's not necessarily there. I normally try to help people to look at outcome, not good and bad. In fact, my kids even, I try to help them look at outcomes, not good and bad. Because if I get into the habit of teaching them good versus bad, like let's say smoking, and I'm like, smoking's bad, smoking's bad, smoking's bad, and I keep trying to tell them it's so bad. Well, when they get to a certain age and other kids might be doing it, all they learned is it's bad. And that might even generate more curiosity because they don't know what the outcome is. They just know it's bad. So they might feel a little bit rebellious and some energy because of that rebellious nature that's happening when they go to smoke. And they'll feel like they're part of this crowd because it was just bad. Good and bad doesn't get us too far. Instead, we talk about outcomes, right? So I talk with my kids, not necessarily good or bad. And especially when they ask me questions about, Dad, is this good or bad? I normally, sometimes I'm human and I fail at this. But I'll try to talk to them about outcomes versus good or bad. Smoking, for example. What I normally talk to them about is, well, here's the health impacts if you do smoke. Here's the things you could probably expect. Here's things that happen with smoking. So I have a conversation around it so they can make a wise choice because they're informed. They're not just walking away going, my dad thinks this is bad. So polarizing thinking, getting stuck in good and bad, no middle ground. And sometimes we do that to ourselves, right? Where we have to think ourselves are perfect or we failed. There's no middle ground again. We can't get a B+ on something because that's a failure. It has to be the A+. So when we get into work assignments, or we're being a parent, or we're working with others, even in spousal situations, if we didn't hit the mark of 100%, we immediately assume we're 0%. And as soon as we think that, we create a tremendous amount of stress for ourselves and anyone around us, because that negative thinking takes a toll on people around us. So there's some ideas of what negative thinking looks like. If you're doing those things, try to watch for it. Try to catch yourself. Try to see if you can do something different, right? So if you're catastrophizing, stop in the moment you start catastrophizing. Challenge the thoughts. Think about, well, what's the most likely solution here? Or what's the most likely reason why this might be happening, right? Challenge yourself with those negative thoughts. Open your mind and try to look for where is the positive? What might actually be happening? If you can learn to challenge those negative thoughts and increase your positive thinking and decrease that negative thinking, you actually will find more solutions in life. People enjoy being around you more, and you'll have less stress. Positive thinking can impact you in so many beneficial ways. Our last topic, stress management for our kids and in the home. What we can do as parents, especially during COVID-19, but actually anytime we could do these things. So first off, we need to have structure in the home, right? So we're looking at ways to be able to make sure that it's not just loosey-goosey, everything is a free-for-all now, right? So we still have times we get up, we still have bedtimes, the structure in the home, if they still are doing homeschool or school assignments at home, we want to make sure they know when that's happening, when it starts, when it ends. I talked about in my home, what we do is we had a family meeting. We talked about what the structure was going to be. I told them when they can come and talk with me when I'm not working, so that we have times that we can go over assignments if they have questions or needs. That way they feel confident and comfortable with the situation at hand. They don't have to feel that stress of not knowing, right? A lot of times anxiety is produced from what we don't know. So if we can make sure that kids have a clear understanding of what that structure looks like, they're gonna feel calmer, which is gonna bring the stress down in the home. The next one, be patient. This one, I can't emphasize enough how important this is, just being a parent, period. You know, I've had lots of parents I've worked with where they say things like, well, they shouldn't be doing this, and they shouldn't be doing that, and they should be doing this. That's a lot of judgment. And not only that, a lot of times parents become very impatient because they expect a child to behave beyond what their age is. Case in point, with my children, I ask them to do a chore. Maybe they forget, they get onto video games. I've seen parents totally ream their kids for things like this. In my house, I just go up and I say, hey, what's going on? And if they have no idea, they have no idea. Or I might ask a more pointed question of, hey, what happened with your chore that I asked you to get done? What's going to happen is I'm going to learn quickly was, did they choose and ignore the chore on purpose? Or did they forget? Most of the time, is they forgot. Why? Because there's really fun, entertaining things that they wanted to go do. That's happened to me before, even as an adult. I've had times where I get really excited about something and I forget some of my responsibilities. It happens. So why would we hold a higher standard for our kids who are younger, who are developing? So we want to be patient with our kids. We want to give our children every opportunity to succeed instead of trying to find fault in everything they do. In fact, consequences and fault finding, that should be absolutely last. If even on the table at all, it should be gone. Consequences, in fact, should be extremely rare. What we're wanting to do is positive reinforcement. We want to build our children up. So we want to be patient with what's going on. We want to allow them to learn and identify what needs to be done, giving them every opportunity, again, to succeed. Next, physical activity. If you remember from the last class, we talked about how much physical activity is important when we're dealing with stress. This is equally as important for a family. Do something physical together. Find opportunities to be active together, whether it's family walks, whether it's being out and doing some kind of activity like playing basketball or going to the river. But be active, do something. And when it's COVID-19, come up with challenges. My wife and my daughter, they came up with a really fun one. They do a daily push-up challenge, right? So find opportunities, find ways to integrate physical activity. That can help our stress level as well. And then dress for the occasion. If you get up and you dress, you don't shower, you leave your pajamas on, you don't get yourself set up for the day, you're gonna feel that way as well. It's just a reality. When I get up, and if I'm not showered, I'm not clean, I keep wearing my pajamas around, I feel very non-motivated. I just wanna have a lazy day. And I recognize that. So I get up, I take a shower, I get dressed for what the occasion's gonna be. So obviously, like this occasion, I wore a shirt about promoting physical activity and healthy eating because it's so important with stress management. So I dressed for the videos. But this is important for our kids as well. Make sure they're getting up, taking showers, cleaning themselves, getting dressed for the day, that they're not just laying around either. This can help reduce some of the stress and give some normalcy. So going hand in hand with that physical activity, even if it's not physical activity, spending time with our kids can help them feel like things are okay. So make sure that we schedule it in, that it's equally as important to all the other things we got to do as parents. Make sure you're scheduling in time to be with your kids, do something fun, or just even if it's a conversation. At minimum, in my house, I make sure that I tuck my kids in every night. And sure, some people say, well, why would you do that? They're 14 and 12 and 10. They don't need tucked in anymore. You're right, they don't need it. But I love the opportunity because I go sit down with them. I talk with them. I give them a chance to talk with me about anything that they want to talk with me about one-on-one. And I get a moment to just be there with them and tuck them in. That's one thing I add to my schedule. There's lots of other things I make sure I prioritize and make sure that I'm gonna see and spend time with my kids. That's important. And as you grow to learn and love these moments with your kids, they will remember these for a lifetime. And it helps reduce stress. So, find the time. Spend it with your kids. All right, so in our homes, you might have a small space, you might have a large space, and depending on what your situation is, you might have to look at this next one and identify what's best for you. But especially during COVID-19, when we're kind of quarantined to our homes, make sure that there's places for people to go and have individual time. Find a walk-away space, right? Everybody needs some of that space. If they're constantly having to be around their siblings all day long, they're probably going to start getting at each other's throats and they're going to be frustrated. Stress is going to go up. They need some alone time to go and just breathe. So identify what that is. You might have one space that people take turns to go and have some alone time. But identify where is that, because we need it as humans. A place to escape for a little bit. Going hand in hand with that, being patient, taking a deeper dive into that. We want to be able to expect behavioral issues. Of course that's going to happen. Again, this is remembering these are children we're talking about. There's certain behaviors we know children are going to do, and that's okay. Not that we make the behavior okay, but we can also expect it, be patient with it, and give appropriate guidance and work with them and address the situation in a healthy way instead of a way that creates fear with our child or disdain. So we want to be able to talk with them, work with them, expect the outbursts, expect things might happen. Going hand in hand with that one as well is practicing acceptance. Now acceptance, we're going to have a whole class on this one that you can find through our other videos that we will send a link to, but there's a whole training on acceptance itself. And acceptance is huge in the home. Acceptance is one of those things, if it's not in your heart and the way you're parenting, you're probably running into some big roadblocks and things that are frustrating as a parent. Acceptance is allowing and recognizing the humanness of all of us, that we're all prone to mistakes. We're all going to do things that are frustrating, but we can accept and have an absolute love for our children that is unbreakable. And always expressing that, always being there, and having the acceptance for what happens. Now, acceptance doesn't mean that we don't hold accountability. Sometimes people think that once you have acceptance, there's no accountability, and that's not true. Acceptance is just accepting what is happening, where things are at, and being able to have an open conversation without the judgment, without the frustration. But again, acceptance is a much lengthier topic. Please check out the acceptance video and look into that one. Is limiting the exposure to media for our kids on COVID-19. Now this, of course, applies right now, COVID-19, but this can apply to lots of situations that might be really hard for a kid to fathom and understand. School shootings is something that's more common in this generation. So if we have school shootings all over the news when one happens, this can be stressful and hard for a child to really understand what's going on and process this information. So we want to limit exposure to that. Now, it doesn't mean that we want to ignore what's happening, and it doesn't mean that we don't talk to them. Anything in human life is on the table and is something we can talk about with our kids. Everything that's happening in human life we can talk about. It's on the table, and if we don't, I promise you, someone else will talk to your kid. And so the question is, do you want you to be the one talking to your kid, or do you want someone else to give the message? So, going back to the situation at hand, COVID-19, we want to be able to talk with our kids, open up. The best way to do this, because each child, depending on age and situation, it might go a lot different. So the big tool I will give you is go in to explore. So that might look like, hey, Sammy, with COVID-19 going on right now, tell me what you've learned about it. Tell me what your feelings are on it. Tell me what you're worried about. Tell me what things might help you. So we are exploring, we're being curious about what's going on in their mind. This is critical when we have stressful, tough situations for our children. We want to be able to step in and have these kinds of conversations with them so that we can learn. Once we've learned the information, then we know how to kind of guide and give a message that's more appropriate for where they're at. So limit your media exposure for kids, and then open up, be curious of what's going on, and see what they already know and where you might want to guide the information. Now, again, with COVID-19, more specifically, our next bullet point here is identifying ways for them to socialize. Friends are important. We want our kids to be able to connect with them still. So find ways for them to connect. Find Zoom parties or FaceTime parties or ways to connect through the media. Instead of going out and meeting them where we can't do that right now, find alternatives so they can still connect with their friends. That's going to be important. But this can apply to any stressful situation once again. When we have stressful situations, socialization can help. Being with others that love us and want to be around us and want to engage with us, that's important. So we want to create opportunities for children to socialize, be with their friends, and take that time. Another thing you can do in the home is notice the good in others. This might be within the family, with siblings, with spouses, with children. It also might be with others that we're looking at, others that are trying to make differences. If we can find the good in others, normally we're not going to be so critical, and it gets us out of that negative thinking. If you remember, negative thinking normally creates stress, whereas positive thinking brings it down. So if we can kind of see the good in others and practice that, that actually can be very valuable when we're in stressful situations. All right, so this next topic is one we've talked about in another video as well. This is about humor and laughing. It's important. If you remember in the last video, we talked about laughter has a bunch of positive effects when there's stress. It creates certain chemicals in the body that make you feel good. So we want to create moments to laugh, right? Find funny things, whether it's a joke. My dad, he's great. He always looks up new jokes. When I was growing up, it seemed like at least every other day he'd come home with some new joke to tell the family, right? So find ways to increase the humor and the laughter where appropriate. And that can be a decrease in stress. And our last one, this one you have to be cautious with, but find ways to go outside. Find ways to enjoy nature, go on nature walks within limits and within reason, watching out for that social distancing. But find ways to be outside, whether it's just in the garden, out on the front porch. Outside air, being out there just can kind of help decrease stress as well. So just like I mentioned in the last video, this is not a complete, all-encompassing list of ways to de-stress or to bring down stress and manage stress in the home. But it is a list of things that might be able to help as you try to work with your kids to decrease that stress where you have it. Hopefully that's helpful. And hopefully what you can do is take this list, see how it applies to your family, and maybe even add to it and find the things that work for you. I appreciate your time and appreciate you taking a look at this video. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions or concerns. Thank you.